Well, it's amazing to me, but in the last decade or so, geneticists and molecular biologists have discovered that almost the entirety of the human genome is actually functional. And this is a radical reimagining of the human genome, because prior to this, most people thought that the human genome was comprised of evolutionary debris, of junk DNA, if you will. And the fact that we now are completely revising our understanding of the human genome is astounding to me. But the fact that most of the human genome is functional reflects the fact that this looks like it's a designed system, and most of the DNA is actually playing a role in regulating gene expression. It's essentially the instruction set that is telling the DNA how to carry out the set of instructions in it in such a way to build a human organism. Evolutionary biologists have argued that the genomes of most organisms consist of non-functional DNA that is essentially evolutionary debris, the leftovers of an evolutionary history. And moreover, they'll point to places in genomes of organisms that naturally group together where you have nearly identical junk DNA sequences in corresponding locations. And they argue that the only way to make sense of this is that if life's history essentially is an evolutionary history, but now that we're learning that junk DNA is actually functional, then you could understand those sequences as being the product of a creator's handiwork. And the fact that they occur in similar locations, to me, reflects common design or shared designs that are employed in these different organisms, as opposed to common descent or shared evolutionary history. One of the most significant projects in terms of identifying function for junk DNA is called the ENCODE project, which stands for the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements. And many evolutionary biologists are opposed to the results and the conclusions of the ENCODE project, which are showing that a vast proportion of the human genome is functional, because they argue that if these results are correct, it means that evolution, or at least key aspects of the evolutionary paradigm, cannot be correct. And so they're evaluating the results in light of their theory, as opposed to evaluating the theory in light of the results. And so this has ignited what are called the junk DNA wars within biology, where evolutionary biologists are attacking anybody who would dare say that the ENCODE results have any type of credibility. Well, at the end of the day, there really are two competing worldviews for humanity's essence and nature. One is a view that we find in Scripture, that human beings have infinite value and worth because we're made in God's image. And because we were made in God's image, it was worthwhile for God to take on the form of a human being and die on the cross so that we could be reconciled to our Creator. The other conception of humanity is one in which evolution has produced us, where we're the product of an evolutionary history, where we weren't intended, there's no purpose to humanity, we're nothing more than animals. And that view renders human beings ultimately without any true value or worth. And I believe actually many of the social ills in the world today trace back to that conception of humanity. It undermines morality. I think the despair that many young people feel today traces back to a view that they have of themselves that's shaped by the evolutionary paradigm. And to me, the exciting news is that the scientific evidence increasingly supports the notion that as human beings we're exceptional in the way that the Bible describes us as being made in God's image. Yeah, well, sadly, the only view that we see presented for human origins, particularly in a scientific arena, is a view that is evolutionary in nature. And part of the idea here is that people are equating evolution and evolutionary models with science. But in fact, it's actually possible to construct creation models that are scientific or intelligent design models that are scientific, but these particular viewpoints are not permitted within the confines of science today because of the influence of what's called methodological naturalism, the idea that science cannot appeal to the handiwork of a creator. This is an artificial restriction on science that I think has devastating consequences. So to me, I think the way we combat this one-sided approach to science is at the top levels of science, where we need to have more and more people in the scientific community that advocate for intelligent design, that advocate for a creationist perspective, who are scholars in their own right, who are able to marshal a strong scientific case for design and for creation. And I'm encouraged because I'm seeing more and more people in the scientific community willing to be outspoken along these lines. And I think when that happens, we'll begin to see the tide turn. Well, I work with an organization called Reasons to Believe. The focus of Reasons to Believe is to show how the latest discoveries in science provide evidence for God's existence and the reliability of Scripture, with the hope that, number one, we can dispel this idea that science and faith are in conflict with each other. This is very important because many people will use science as a reason to reject the gospel, but also we're trying to build a bridge positively to the gospel using scientific discoveries. So we're looking to encourage the faith of believers and to equip believers to be more effective at introducing people to the Christian faith using science as that bridge.